You're about to enter into a new world of knowledge, curiosities, and high strangeness. This is a podcast of Straight Up Strange Productions.
You're listening to Mysteries and Monsters. I'm your host, Paul Bestel. On today's show, author and investigator Anna Marie Manalo joins me to discuss her re-released and updated book, Portal. Anna has been a long supporter of the show, so it was lovely to get a chance to have her rejoin me on Mysteries and Monsters. Portal is a book of two halves. The first focusing on a family in the Philippines who unwittingly become a magnet for strange phenomena which has plagued them for over 70 years. Anna discusses how this began and some of the incidents she's included in her book. The second half of the book features several cases that Anna has investigated and interviewed the witnesses firsthand. We cover a strange tulpa, a Bigfoot with a taste for popcorn it seems, a strange encounter in rural France, and an unusual musical introduction in Nice. It was lovely to speak with Anna again, and you can pick a copy of Portal up either through Amazon or by visiting Beyond the Fray Publishing. As always, you can support the show by signing up for Patreon in our show notes, as you can every week. For $4 a month, you get ad-free episodes, early access, and also regular updates in my new exclusive Patreon-only Paranormal Archive. Mysteries and Monsters is across all social media platforms. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Please subscribe to our channel on YouTube, and you can find the website and contact me via mysteriesandmonsters.com. Artwork for the show, as always, is by Dean Bestel. Brennan Storr of the Ghost Story Guys is the producer, and Mysteries and Monsters is delighted to be a part of the Straight Up Strange network. Let's now join Anna Marie Manalo to dive into the stories she covers inside the covers of Portal. On today's show, author Anna Manalo joins me to discuss her book Portal, newly updated and expanded with a lifetime of exploration and investigation. Anna has a keen eye for unusual phenomena. Anna, welcome back to Mysteries and Monsters. How are we?
Oh, we are very good, Paul. It's nice to be back on your show. It's been a few years here, and I'm glad to be able to talk about my book and my upcoming book.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. And as you say, we were laughing off air that it's been 2 years and not much seems to have happened around the world since we last spoke.
Yeah, except for the pandemic.
As I mentioned, I was listening to the previous conversation we had back on episode 9, which seems incredible. Now I'm into episode 130 whatever. And you were telling me that you were planning a trip to France in 2020. So I presume that didn't occur.
No, that did not occur. A couple of reasons. One being that my husband, actually, who was traveling with me, we've been traveling quite a bit in the past. Since 1998, we've been going different places, and part of the book Portal occurs because of the number of people we've met during those travels and the accounts that they have generously shared with me in some of those trips. But this coming one had to be put off, being that the passports, I have one, he has one, but his needed to be renewed. And we're coming up now on week 18 of it being overdue. So sadly, we had to put it off until next year. We're hoping for May or June at this point, and hopefully his passport will be here. So I actually was preparing to also take a train to Germany, where my next book is set, to do some real-time investigation and actually talk maybe perhaps if there's any people that are still alive today in the area, living in the area around Frankfurt, to just kind of verify, what the area was like back then in 1938, 39, during the World War when it happened, the events that this lady was talking to me about. So, no, so France is off right now, not until the following year.
Yeah, well, fingers crossed the passport turns up, first of all, and secondly, that everything settles down and we can kind of get back to travelling to where we'd like to do.
Yes, I hope so too.
So, Portal, Anna, is newly re-released with some updates and some expansions, but when we first chatted, we sort of focused on the book and everything without really looking into what brought you to this point to writing a book, because obviously you've been a field investigator for MUFON, and obviously you grew up in the Philippines. So what was it that got you into the paranormal and ufology, Anna, and saw you sort of get involved in it to the level that you have over the years?
Well, Paul, it was easy for me because I grew up in a neighborhood that used to be actually a graveyard. And when I say graveyard, not in an official sense, but because it was a site where there was a lot of Japanese soldiers and Filipinos, civilian and otherwise, who unwittingly were killed in the area, and their bodies were never given a proper burial. And because of that, as time went on, right after the war was over, people were selling land right and left for people to resettle and get on with their lives. My grandparents, who lived in the neighborhood, we were actually just right across the street from where all these hauntings took place. They bought land and built a home on ground that actually had a lot of remains. They found out later on, when people started digging in the backyard, why these things were happening and in the backyards of other people's homes. So it was easy for me in the sense that I grew up in a haunted home, obviously a haunted neighborhood, and one of the people who happened to live across the street had a very extensively, and I say infested, what I mean by that is not by roaches or insects, but infested by demonic entities and whatnot. It seems like violence tends to open some kind of rip in the fabric of reality and introduces another dimension, in this case, probably multiple dimensions, because you had all kinds of sightings. So being in that type of atmosphere got me interested. And as years went on and I followed up, were all happening one right after the other. And as time went on, even with my move to the U.S. As a teenager, people were still telling me stories and things that were happening to them. Eventually, I became interested in ufology, which to me is similar phenomena, not the same. And what's happening is I'm chronicling. I'm starting to write down everything that has happened. In one case, I followed the one individual over decades. And then in some cases, I met people through my travels, through MUFON, and some of the more distinct cases that I chronicled and investigated. So I finally, at one point, put all of them together, and this is what Portal is about. Yeah. It's a compilation of everything so far that has come my way.
In regards to your work with MUFON, how are you viewing the current climate in regards to ufology, Anna? Because obviously things are very different than what they were 2 years ago. We've just had the US government report, which, depending on which side of the fence you're sitting, is either groundbreaking or nothing too special.
Well, it's interesting. As the time passes, people are a little bit more accepting than they were before. I worked as a school counselor for a very conservative area. And when I say conservative, I'm being polite. These people were not at all receptive to any kind of idea of an alternate reality, any type of ET experience, anything of that manner. You would be openly ridiculed by people. And these are people in education. for even discussing anything like that, let alone discuss it in front of teenagers in this case. But now it seems like because we're seeing more and more of it in media, in movies and things of that nature, and I think, some of the producers are showing it as entertainment, but there's really a message behind it. There's always a kernel of truth. And now the last one and most conservative starts admitting it in the body of a report. That was a long time coming. When I think of all the agencies out there that are investigating this, the government knows the most, and yet it shares the least and is the most critical of it, something that has been going on under their eyes and noses. They're actually acknowledging maybe 5% of the reality. I think it's all to save face. I think there's been, as you and I both know, a lot of criticism about how the government is handling it. So part of their propaganda is to say, okay, so we'll put out a report. We'll put some things in there that, we are willing to admit happened so that we can look good. So that's always been my position about the government. They're there to look good. They're not there to do good per se. They're there to look good. And I won't say anything more than that. I worked for a state government for a long time, a district government. And I've seen some things, some interesting things that are not really realistic.
I think it is very interesting that, for me, I don't remember a period of time since I've been interested in this subject for probably the best part of 40 years, and that there seems to be an acceptance that something odd is going on. They're not sort of saying what they think the oddness is, but at least we're now getting to a point where they're going, well, something's happening. We don't know what it is. We're not going to say what it is, but we can't explain it as well. And I'm very surprised, because I was expecting it to be a complete whitewash. It was all, once again, misidentification, hallucination, people exaggerating experiences and whatever. And yet, I think, because of what's happened since the Tic Tac video and the fact that we've had these credible witnesses who keep coming forwards, and now more incidents are being reported that have affected Navy vessels, clearly there's been a real sea change somewhere. Whether the government's happy with that sea change, I'm probably not very sure they are. But I think they're just having to play along with it, really, as you say, because now they've nowhere else left to go, I think.
And that's exactly it, Paul. They have nowhere to go with so many witnesses and the proclivity of people who are highly intelligent, who are well-spoken, speaking the same thing. The government's starting to look like deniers, almost like the climate deniers. It's banging on your door. The forests are all burning. What do you think is happening? There's nowhere to go but to finally say, okay, you've seen it, we've seen it. So we're going to start acknowledging that we do have some incidents here that we can't explain. It's sad that they had to be last to admit it. But finally they are admitting it because they have nowhere to go. They've been cornered. And that's exactly what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's very interesting that they were using the kind of cover of national security as a major issue here, because I've heard people say, oh, well, it's probably Chinese drones and things like that. Now, I don't know about you, but I suggest that if any foreign agency tried to kind of swarm a US warship in American waters, there would be a very short response to that incident, and I don't think it would be people filming them going, we don't know what it is. I think it would be loading cannons.
Yes. I do agree with that. Yeah.
So that's another one of the sceptical explanations we can strike off at.
Yeah.
So in regards to Portal, as we've referred to, the book was originally released a couple of years ago, but since that time you've moved the book to a new publisher and you've expanded it and added some content to the book. So for anybody that's not heard it, the book is essentially in two sections really. We've got the first part that focuses on a family that we touched on in the introduction in regards to the myriad of entities and weird occurrences and things that occurred to them. And then the second part is more of a sort of collection of witness accounts that you've encountered over the years that includes some pretty creepy stories that I'll touch on in a bit. So the family that are at the heart of the first portion of the book, Anna, are a typical normal family in that era and that day and age, where there seems to be a magnet for weirdness that just comes to them. And it's not just one type of thing that seems to go on. And that's what's always surprised me about that portion of the book, is the fact that it seems to be such a variety of incidents.
Yes. And I don't know, actually, I picked up the book recently to look for some distinctive points that I had made in the first edition, which made it also into the second edition. I mean, what I did was I explained the transition between the family, which to me was more an in-depth study, and then moving on to the others who were taking up maybe a chapter or two, but not more. But I attempted to unify them into a coherent whole at some point in the book. What I find about the first one that's distinctive is not just the propensity of the members of the family to experience, some kind of negative entity, but a history that points to me, and I didn't discuss this in the book, but it points to me the existence of, and I don't know if you're familiar with this, the idea of a curse. Way back, there was folklore that talks about how one person can lead to the demise or the misfortune of an entire family. And Paul, I don't know how much you've read of the book, but in the beginning of the book, if you recall, there was an incident where a young girl was fleeing the Japanese army who was advancing on Manila in the company of her mother and siblings. And she ended up north into an area, and it still exists today. It's called Baguio. Baguio, during the time, was replete with forests, tropical vegetation and things of that nature. It's not as developed as it is today as a tourist hotspot. But within Baguio, there were, I don't want to call them nunneries. They're convents, huge convents, Spanish style, and they sought haven in one of those places. I believe that all the different things that happened to this family stem from that encounter. That this young girl, I believe she was only 7 maybe at the time, or even younger, she encountered this nun. It was a disembodied nun. It was a ghost that apparently passed away tragically, or maybe was an evil force to begin with. It looked to her child's eyes, to be a nun dressed in a black habit. And it left an indelible print of a signet ring with a symbol on it, on her thigh. And to me, as you look through the book, it seemed to me to be the catalyst for all the subsequent events, if you may. And as I talked to people after the book was published, someone had mentioned the idea to me that it might in fact be a curse that was brought on by whatever this entity was.
What has always sort of intrigued me about that, Anna, is what was special about this girl that caused this interaction, because it seems as though she'd attracted something when they were seeking shelter in this area that seemed to attach itself to them and manifest in such a way to have this encounter that left such an indelible mark. And as you refer to, the family's life after that point was forever changed, it seemed, regardless.
Yes, yes. And what is not published in this book is the fact that there were some people there who actually moved into that house. And I was already here in the U.S. when it happened. The gentleman and his wife moved in with a small child. A small child had all kinds of health problems, and he himself lost his job. His marriage started to deteriorate. You're kind of classic horror film where something goes wrong as soon as they move in. There's dissension within the family, there's accidents, there's unspeakable scents, sightings of different things. The pet dog dies. It was happening, from what I understand, to this man. So eventually, a couple of years later, they finally moved out. And as soon as they moved out, they were together. The marriage started to mend itself. The child started to get well. At this point, they already had they had a child on the way. And they were really afraid to stay in the house because they were afraid something would happen to the infant once it was born. So something got brought home, so to speak, from this trip to the convent and back again. She brought something, must have brought something. And I'm not pointing by any means at this lady who's now an elderly lady herself, but something had to have been triggered. And like you said, something was special about her that got her earmarked, for whatever reason. This creature honed in on her.
It does seem remarkable that even after they escaped the horrors of the war and some of the terrible things that occurred in the Philippines under Japanese occupation at that period, that whatever it was had sort of, as you refer to, Anna, attached itself to her and gone home. But then it's the fact that in situations like that, normally you would expect that it would be the apparition of the nun or whatever it was to continue appearing, and yet it seems that it was everything but the nun that continued to plague this family over the following decades. And
if you recall, it reminds me a little bit of the Mothman, in the sense that somehow maybe perhaps the nun was a harbinger of the doom that was to follow. It wasn't necessarily the nun, as it wasn't necessarily the Mothman sighting, but it was more like a predictor of events. And that's what it looked to me from one angle, and then in another angle, it sounded like, something that was a curse that was placed on the family. Because the next big event, as you know, it created havoc for this woman and her husband, which was an irreparable change. More tragedies followed. A lot of things that were already happening in that neighborhood seems like was compounded with her moving in with her mother with the passing of the husband.
Yeah.
So it was one layer of haunting after another layer of haunting, of which the local clergy seemed very helpless to do anything about.
I mean, that gives it a different level of fear, I suppose, as well, Anna, because often we are always told that you can always find support and help from a variety of sources, be it investigators or people of a religious faith, regardless of which denomination they follow. And yet, nothing seems to be able to help this family. They seem to be stuck in this constant battle against strange entities and bad luck, no matter what they try. And I think one of the things that's really striking about this lady's experience and that of the family is that they still keep trying to move forwards regardless of everything else that's going around them that they will constantly keep trying to push forward, because I would imagine it must be quite tiring trying to fight some unseen malignant force that seems to be just tormenting her and her family.
Well, Paul, I think it's part of the culture as well. And what I've noticed here now, having lived in the States for over 45 years, is that there's a climate of denial almost when these negative things happen, because it's a very Roman Catholic country. 99% of the people there are Roman Catholic. They don't want to let on that something like this is lingering, because they're afraid other people would avoid them. And it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I think it's a veil that they put on themselves. Whether you could call it courage. Of course, it sounds very courageous and perseverant, but on the other hand, it could also be construed as a denial. I don't think anyone has ever really formally requested an exorcism on the house, let alone the person that is the focal point, which I believe is, I think it's the haunting of a person, not so much a place. I mean, in a certain sense, because, you know, it's ground that has seen a battle or two, has seen a lot of violence. It's certainly opened something. But with her entering the environment, there was certainly a lot more. And in certain parts of the book, her own mother has seen something totally unrelated to me, but I can only construe it, having been an investigator for MUFON. It was a UFO. And it caused a physical manifestation. The woman had to go to the doctor because she had, you know, burns on her face.
Yeah.
So, you know, when you're thinking, okay, we already have so much going on in this house, and then one night she's just peering out the window, trying to make an effort to look and see where that brightness, she's probably hoping, I don't know, for God to bless the house, and he's coming, and no, it burns her face. I mean, it's funny in one way, but it's really not funny.
Yeah.
So these strange things are happening also at the same time. And it's not unique to that particular town, because later on I traveled to a totally different one way down south, about 4 hours down. And there was another family that was having not so much their issue as because the Japanese had invaded that town in World War II. And they could still hear the marching and the running and the screaming in the streets.
It's like it's left an indelible impression on the environment, and regardless, it will always repeat itself.
Yes, and the local university to this day, the gymnasium that is in the center of the campus, it has a stage, some kind of platform, because they practice there for plays. It doubles as a little playhouse. No one can use the basement because they tortured prisoners and priests in the basement. They had POWs housed in there during World War II. And on the stage on a given night, you can see priests walking around in a circle with no heads on. Decapitated.
It does seem, because obviously there was such a ferocious occupation of the area, and there were some, as we've touched on, some horrific war crimes committed, that some of the things that went on, when we talk about hauntings around the world, and things like that will always leave such an impression in the environment, that if we have such a person, as we refer to in the main part of the first book, this one particular lady who seems to be a catalyst for weird things wherever she goes, as you refer to, the person seems to be haunted rather than any particular property or area. And yet, I think clearly in different areas of the Philippines, there are certain people that are obviously of a similar nature, that their presence creates the right conditions for things to reappear. Yes.
As much as there's, these people in modern day, so to speak, tend to become an abductee and have a familial tradition through different generations of being mocked by ETs for abduction. So you see, there's a trend here. It's not just these ghosts or hauntings. It's also, I believe, certain people, for one reason or another, and I won't digress because I could go different directions here, but I'm trying to focus on the ones that somehow there's generational experiences of missing time, of having been taken somewhere. Not just one person, but several. And it reminds me of the Andreasen affair, where it's the mother and I believe the daughter had some kind of interaction. The whole family was there at the time. I mean, I could cite a few where that happens.
Yeah.
So there's a parallel here with all these things. And the main question that remains, which you mentioned earlier, was what marks this person over everybody else to be the one to go through these experiences? And I don't have an answer, as much as I don't have an answer for David Paulides, the Missing 411 series of books that he wrote. How come these people are being earmarked to disappear? And then he made he actually articulated it in a number of his books, a disability perhaps, a giftedness, some kind of intellectual anomaly, or maybe even some kind of a trait that is not seen with other people. So I think that's what you're seeing here, that what I'm latching on to is they are taking, so to speak, the cream of the crop, the outliers, the 5% or the 10% of the population that stand out either physically or intellectually or maybe even spiritually. And I'm not saying the woman in the first book is a saint or anything like that.
Yes.
But apparently she was tagged.
It's an interesting concept because often when we talk about things like hauntings or UFOs and abductees, Anna, it is remarkable how it seems to only affect certain people. And like you touched on there are very notable exceptions to the rule where there will be a generational interaction. Like you said, a mother and a daughter, or a father and a son, or even family members who go through the same experience at the same time. However, most of the time it seems to be individuals or people that aren't related in some way that have an interaction in regards to UFOs. Hauntings are obviously a different kettle of fish because they tend to affect a property rather than a person. But it is peculiar that it does seem to be a specific type of person or in a specific period that these things seem to attract themselves or find people that they seem interested in more than others. And it's very odd because often when you look at them at face value, and I'm sure you've come across this during your work with MUFON, Anna, there is nothing that often will connect these people, and yet there must be something that allows these people to be able to either be more open or more aware or have a deeper connection to something that enables them to be earmarked in such a way.
And they always had this saying where, when the student is ready, the teacher will come. And in all these reports, all these witnesses with their stories, they have changed as a result of the experience. And I'm saying changed as in they have a very different approach now to things because they realize that the world is much bigger than they thought it was. And it's not just this world, but a different dimension, and it extends into infinity. Their opinions are different. They're more, and maybe it's because they were open to the experience and they were ready for the experience that they had it, but it made them even more receptive to what might be coming.
Yeah.
So I've met people who don't believe in ghosts. I have a next door neighbor who laughs it off and everything. Never lived in anywhere where there was any suggestion of anything different or unusual. So, but then there's people who are willing to entertain the idea. So maybe because they are, the student is ready.
Yes.
So the teacher is there.
It's very interesting that as you refer to this family, because there does seem to be a real strength to this lady as well, that she's able to deal with these remarkably frustrating and tragic events on occasions. Some would say, as you referred to when we were talking about it, that they seem to want to hold this in and not make a show of it because they don't want the attention, they don't want the stigma attached to the matter, and they try to sort of do the best they can, which is something I think a lot of people do around the world when they're faced with traumatic situations. You know, we'll get through it. We'll do what we can.
Yes.
So for her to have gone through this period, with the greatest respect, probably most of her life, and still want to get up on a morning, I find remarkable, and it shows a real strength of character that this lady possesses.
Yes, and this lady is very humble. But I have to tell you something very strange, Paul, that I've never shared in any other radio show or podcast. To date, I've kept in touch with a couple of the people, including the woman who has signed off an agreement, because this is kind of like a life story. No one in her family has displayed any interest at all in reading the book. And I'm not saying that lightly. I just think it's kind of anomalous not to want to read when they're part of the equation, part of the unfolding. So to me, I think part of why I suggested denial is because of that. No one was interested, or they were, I would say, afraid to read it. That's the word that comes to mind. They were afraid to read the book.
I think that's a very interesting aspect to it, because there are many cases where we've had multiple witnesses in a variety of phenomena, Anna, be it cryptozoology, ufology, ghosts, sea serpents, whatever, where one or more people will have the same experience. One person will be very open about what's happened and want to talk about it, and occasionally the other person or other people that are with them will either just clam up, or they just won't want to talk about any of it at all. It's almost as if nothing's happened. And through your experience and your investigations, do you think that is, as you were saying there, sometimes that people are afraid to confront what's actually happened and what they've been through, and they're afraid of the realization that the world they know simply isn't true anymore?
I think that to me, it comes one of two ways. They're either afraid of being ridiculed. They don't want to admit something publicly that might cause censure in their job or in the neighborhood or something like that. Or maybe they're just they're personally reluctant because it would open up some emotional baggage.
Yes.
That they're not prepared to internally handle. We're talking about generational encounters that has caused changes, permanent changes in the family, most of which are not good. And I think that because of that, it would cause them to think, if they were to admit it, it would cause them to think about what they could have done to have stopped the flow. In this case of, to me, and I could be very wrong, of what is, to me, a chronic infestation, something that just seems to be going on, and no one is addressing how to ameliorate it or how to end it. It's kind of like I don't know if you're familiar with the movie Chucky.
Yes, yes.
Well, they're passing this doll on, and this doll is in the house, and, it's killing people and chasing this woman across the kitchen. But it's like, okay, so end it. Do something. Take it to a church or something. Do something with it. But no one would acknowledge that, yes, in fact, it is a doll, but it's a haunted doll. It's haunted by the spirit of something evil. But because there is a denial factor, there has to be, in order to deal with a situation, someone has to accept it first, and the enormity that it presents. And then they have to actually reach out to people and say, I admit it, this is happening to us. Can you help us?
Yeah.
So I think those are two big hurdles, two big chunks that people are not, on the whole, prepared to accept. I could be totally wrong, but that's just what I think.
And I think as well, often, when you're dealing with a situation like this, sometimes you just kind of get used to what's going on, as strange as it is, Anna. You just, as I touched on, we'll try and make the best of a bad situation. This is,
Yes.
this is my definition of a very bad situation. But I think the fact that she's carried on through her life, regardless of this maelstrom around her, and the fact that the family simply don't want to look back at it. There was a very interesting aspect over here. We've had a very successful podcast about the Battersea poltergeist, which was a very long-running haunting that occurred in the mid-50s to the mid-60s over here. And so it's come back to the fore this year, thanks to a series on the BBC. And one of the things that struck me about this was that the witness is still alive. She's almost 80. Shirley Hitchins, and she was very concerned that talking about this incident, even though it's best part of 50 years ago, Anna, that it would bring it back.
And I've heard that before. I've heard that reasoning before, and I will tell you this, Paul, because I know that this is my belief, of course. I mean, other people who are listening probably don't believe the same as I do, but I think that when you discuss certain topics and display an interest in them, in this case, something that is not positive, it's not flowers or a sunny day, you attract those things, those negative energies, and you might even be summoning the original entity that you are discussing. So I have heard that, and I understand her point of view. Believe me, I really do. The interesting thing about it is I was on a show, and I don't know if we're running out of time here. I was on Coast to Coast with Connie Willis a couple of years ago with the first edition of this book. And I was talking about something, I don't exactly know which one it was about. And then there was something outside the window.
Yeah.
And I addressed it in probably the first 10 minutes as I was prepping to talk to her. And this is like late into the evening. It's a show that airs, I think, at like 4 a.m. Eastern time.
Yeah.
I'm sitting there alone, and I'm looking out the window, and I'm thinking, what is this? And I do believe it. I do believe that lady in Battersea when she talks about her reluctance to talk about it. And that might be part of the reluctance of this family as well.
I mean, looking back, how does she view it now, Anna, in regards to what they've been through? Has she kind of come to peace with what's occurred and what continues to occur? Because obviously the regularity of it seems to have subsided somewhat in recent years.
I don't know that it has subsided. The last I heard was actually 2 years ago that there was an occupant in the condominium she was living in. And I don't mean that a tenant or a neighbor. There was a disembodied voice. Okay. And I think at this point, she has subsumed it to her unconsciousness. She lives day by day in the same place, has attempted to renovate the condominium to make it more cheerful. Earlier, she had furniture removed because it was starting to become very cumbersome. And as she was advancing in age, she was explaining that she did not want as much furniture that would block out the light. And I thought that was interesting when she said that. I don't want the light blocked out. I want it to be as bright as possible in here. So internally, I think she knew that there was something that was still going on, whatever it was that followed her. And when you walk, and this is just based on someone else who was telling me, when you walk into the place, you'll see all kinds of religious objects, crosses and saints and things of that nature. So I think it's her internal effort to try to bless the place, or at least minimize it in that way.
Obviously, clearly, she believes whatever it is encouraged by shadows.
Yes, exactly. So, no, so it's not over. And as they say, it's not over until the fat lady sings. And it seems like, everybody has withdrawn somehow from her periphery. There are friendships that are no longer there because of this lingering feeling that they get when she's around. So people are not drawn to her. Yeah. I mean, there's a similar story later on in the book about someone here who is local who also, has elicited some kind of being to be near her. And we don't really know the nature. I don't know the nature of it. I'd like to delve more deeply into what is it that she is actually, in my opinion, manifesting.
Yes.
I don't know that it's an evil spirit, but I refer to it as a tulpa, and a thought form. The wishing and the strong desire.
Yes.
Has brought about something in 3 dimensions that has actually been seen by other people. And this creature tends to live, of all things, maybe it's a goblin, I don't know. It lives in a mound.
Yes.
What's in the mound? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a particularly creepy story in the later part of the book.
Yes.
And that's a lady who seems to just be making the wrong choices all the time. And it's interesting that you try and balance the fact up that, as you refer to there, Anna, in regards to her tulpa, that obviously this negative aspect of her life and the problems she'd had in her marriage and the way she was treated and things like that, has it sort of given birth to some kind of construct of this negativity and anger that she's probably been feeling about her role in this situation, which on face value and looking at the report in the book clearly wasn't her fault, but yet, as often is the case when you're stuck in a situation like that, rather than blaming the person that's responsible for bringing her down and throughout that aspect of it, she seems to take some blame, even though it clearly doesn't seem to be her situation or her fault that's caused any of it.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's interesting because the brother that's closest to her has been trying to protect her from these decisions that she makes. And he has given up to the point where, he'll still make the phone calls and check in and things of that nature. But the mound in question that I discuss in the book, he keeps taking it down. And it keeps popping right back up. On the same piece of ground near the river. Grass never grows on it. It's just a mound, like a little hill. He doesn't understand who's doing it. At some point, he thought maybe there were neighborhood kids getting in there, through I don't know how they would get through the gate.
Yeah.
But they get in there and they are rebuilding it for some reason. And she swears up and down she has nothing to do with it. She has no reason to be out there, and yet it just keeps popping up over and over again. He'll take a shovel, knock it back down, push most of it towards the water, and then 2 weeks later, oops, it's here again.
Yeah, something's very keen on that mound, whatever it is, Anna.
Yeah.
I think one of the favourite stories that since I've reread it a couple of times, which I don't understand why I didn't grasp how much I'd like this story the first time I read it a couple of years ago, is the farmhouse at the edge of the forest, which features a witness called Leslie. And the situation, whereas now, obviously 2 years down the line, I've spoken to some of the best and the brightest Bigfoot researchers in the world. That story is very compelling because it's one of those where somebody new moves to an area and it seems that everybody else who lives around her seems to be, it's lovely around here apart from that Bigfoot that keeps bothering everybody and trying to get in their houses and scratching about. And she just goes from that kind of, you can see the kind of journey she goes on from thinking it's maybe a prowler to then, well, it might be a bear. I'm not really sure why a bear would walk like that. Or amble, as one of her neighbours said, to the realisation that it isn't a bear and it isn't a prowler, it's something else. And at that point, she just goes, nah, I'm getting out of here. How did you stumble across that story? Was that something you'd got through your work through MUFON, or was that one of those stories that someone, because of your reputation and the way you are, Anna, that people want to come forward? Because that's quite an honest reaction, that someone is emotionally changed so much by a situation that she just goes away.
This was one of those incidents that they call synchronicity. A college friend of mine that used to be a roommate the last 2 years of college had contacted me one day and told me that she had moved to, I'm not going to disclose the actual town, but the largest and most recognizable one is up in Scranton, Pennsylvania, which is north of here. She had moved into a little town right outside of Scranton. And she said that she had taken a job there. And we were very close when I was in college. And, through the years, life happens, things happen. She'd moved from job to job. And finally, she got a managerial position over there. And I said, well, I haven't seen you. It's been so many years. I have to come and visit you. At the same time that I was talking to her, she was trying to catch up on what was happening with me. And I was telling her I was actually in the process of thinking about compiling a book on all these things that I've experienced in my travels. And, this is post-MUFON at this point. And then I told her about a couple of things I was going to include in the book. And she said, well, then, she said, I have to tell you this. I've been here for 6 months now, and we have a woman that comes in here periodically into the shop. And recently she's finally told everybody she's moving.
Yes.
And a lot of times the people here, the old timers, the locals, they stay forever. So everybody was wondering why this woman was moving, because everybody was pretty close to each other. They got to know each other, yada, yada. So one day they got to sit down and talk, and she was about the same age as her. And she told her, and she said, you have to meet this woman. And I said, okay, if you're telling me what she told you, I think I know what it is, but I want to make sure.
Yeah.
Because she herself was a skeptic.
Yeah.
Okay, my college roommate. So to make a long story short, I took the train to take the bus, to take another bus, and then I was there. And we went to this interesting, it's kind of like the town hangout. The town was only actually maybe, one of those, if you blink, you miss it.
Yes.
It was probably 2 streets.
Yeah.
And then there was a whole stretch of road, and it disappeared into the woods. And this woman apparently was right across the street from this huge farm. They had a farmhouse, and from what I can recall of the farmhouse, some of it was actually falling apart at the time when I saw it. And then there was supposed to be an elderly gentleman that had lived there with his wife, and at one point they had children. All the children moved out, so they were left alone in this huge house that had another house attached to it. The barn was falling apart. And she told me, what is fascinating about it is that she had resigned to the fact that what she was told was real. She was not the kind of person that would really entertain that kind of idea, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
She was told it was a missing link, and some of the people, the police, said, oh, yeah, it's a gorilla.
Yeah. Plenty of those in Pennsylvania, no doubt.
Yeah, the farmer was a believer.
Yeah.
Because he had seen it numerous times. And I think at one point he even said to her, those things that you're doing is causing it to come out, because it has a keen sense of smell. It's always hungry, and so it's going to come out.
Stop making pudding.
Yeah. And the popcorn.
Yeah. Absolutely. Very much so. Yeah. It doesn't say whether it was salted or sweet popcorn, though, Anna.
Probably buttered, I would say.
Absolutely. And it's very interesting that what strikes me most about that is that she just seems to have interactions. I think the gentleman that comes to fit, because she's convinced that there's some person stalking her, and she has the lights fitted. around the house.
Yeah.
And the guy that's fitting them basically says, have you seen what I think you've seen? And she's, well, I've seen something. And he says, no, have you seen what I've seen? Because he clearly knows what's going on, because his wife had been terrified by something, hadn't she?
Yeah, yeah. And I think that for the most part, the entire town knew the kind of incidents that were going on. And they didn't want to frighten her, you know, and but, you know, she had sons that would visit, and she would tell them, and it became a growing concern.
Yeah, it's a really good story, that. And like I say, the thing that really struck me once I've reread it again, Anna, is the fact that when you have these experiences, and I've always liked these kind of cryptid encounters where you have rational, sane people. Not that I'm saying people who claim to, you know, that they're not rational and sane, but when you have people that seem to be new to an area, and everybody just accepts it and thinks, well, you know, you'll get used to seeing it, and then you'll you know, as though he's part of the local wildlife or something, you know, or like, you know, a rare bird that occasionally visits, or the, you know, wolverine that lives in the area that's rarely seen, or something like that. But it's the fact that these people suddenly come to the realization once again that everything they know before they have an encounter like this, be it people, you know, experienced hunters and outdoorsmen and fishermen and people all across the states, the people's encounters that always strike me the most are the ones where they say, I've never done that again, or I had to move away, or we just sold the house and left. Because that always gives it a different level of response for me, because clearly something has happened that they cannot comprehend.
And to tell you the truth, Paul, when I was still, you know, here, and she had told me, my friend, the first thing that came to mind was, is this an alien? You know, because I was more versed in that, so to speak. I was more familiar with that type of, you know, currency, if you say. This is actually the only story in the book about Bigfoot. So it's an outlier to me. I didn't expect the unexpected.
Yes.
I knew it was remote. So there you go. You know, it could be like the farmhouse in France that was remote.
Yes.
Usually abductions take place in remote places. It could be some kind of werewolf or something like that. But the way she was describing it to me on the phone, I thought, well, this is a little different. It's almost like it's toying with her, or it's lured by food, something. You know, because normally if you have an abduction, you come out, there's a light, or something is happening where you're interacting with an unknown object, and then suddenly, inexplicably, you wake up, it's the next morning.
Yes.
This one was different. So it was twofold also, because I wanted to see my friend. I hadn't seen her for a very long time, but I was very intrigued on the way up on the bus as to what I would find out. And part of me, because it was a little strange, I was a little creeped out, to tell you the truth. I was a little concerned. And I even asked her on the phone, how far is your apartment from this woman's house? And she reassured me she lived right in town. So, in fact, we weren't isolated or anything like that. And I said, good, because I don't want to be part of the, you know, the show that's going on, whatever it is that you're telling me about.
Yeah. I'll just investigate it. I don't want to experience it.
Yes. And she said, no, we'll meet in a public place. You know, if you want me to drive you there later on, we can do. And as a matter of fact, I said, yeah, during the day.
Yes.
we could do a quick, fast drive-by. Put the car in idle. Don't turn off the engine.
Yeah. Brilliant. It is a very compelling report when you get something like that. But the thing that I really like about that is the couple in the other farmhouse who are just very, very matter of fact, you know.
Yeah.
Bears do amble. This doesn't amble.
Yeah. It was very strange.
And I think the last bit I want to touch on in the second part of the book, before we quickly touch on your upcoming book, Anna, if that's all right, and you've just mentioned it, is a story that creeped me out the first time I read it, but you've just mentioned it again, and obviously that's the couple, Myra and Bill, who decide to go on a lovely holiday in France. To get a beautiful, beautiful cottage, I believe, and it's lovely and remote, and it's, as picturesque as you could wish it to be until it gets dark.
Yes. And there were some sightings in France. I remember a case in Valençol, way back. I can't remember the name of the gentleman anymore. This farmhouse is actually in what they call the Nouvelle Aquitaine region of France. In that particular area, they have cottages that they rent out. They call them gîtes, G-I-T-E-S. It's a fancy French word for a rental. And basically, you end up somewhere either within a village or you are out there in the sticks, where you have rolling fields around you, and plenty of privacy, but then you have a vehicle that if you wanted to take a tour or something or go to a castle, you can easily just, pop on the GPS and then go. So this was one of those holidays where they were pretty much trying to get some privacy. They were trying to distance themselves because they lived in the city. And get some pastoral life, get a sense of what it was way back in the day. So they ended in this little town. And I think they told me they were about maybe 10 kilometers from the closest village where they got their groceries and things of that nature. And they weren't really obviously expecting anything to happen. They just wanted to relax, drive to a few castles, get some appetizers for an evening out in the back of the cottage where there was like this paved area that functioned as a patio. And then the one side where there was the kitchen window, they had a bedroom. And then off to the side of that was it's not a shed. It's kind of like a place where you used to put animals. I think they had like a pigsty on one side, goats on the other. But it had a barn door and there was a light fixture of some sort in it. They never really examined it because they weren't going to use it. They had parked their car like right on the edge of the property. On the lane that entered towards the house. So they parked it right next to the house. So the night in question, they were coming home from having dinner, and it was later than usual, and they got in, and this is when it all happened. It happened with a light, some kind of blue light that was a few yards away inside the barn. Should I give away the ending?
I'll leave that to you. But yes, I think we could tease a little bit.
Well, I will say this, that the light was not the light that was in the barn. It had nothing to do with the light bulb. Whatever it was moving around in there with a blue light of its own. And then they were looking out the window trying to figure out, the things that you normally think of. Is there a prowler? There's only two of us in here. Is it the neighbor or the landlord? Yes, maybe the landlord is coming over. And this is like 11 o'clock at night. What would the landlord be doing at 11 o'clock at night, walking around in a barn where there are no animals to tend to? So she's looking out and there's a deer, like doe a deer. And she happened to be observing them. And the interesting part of it is, deer have 4 legs. And unless it was a puppy dog, it could stand up on its haunches and beg. Well, in effect, these deer were standing on their haunches. So the question is, do deer stand on their haunches and beg like a dog?
Not the deer I've ever seen.
No. So, it's one of those things where you're just expecting a vacation, and the next thing you know, you decide maybe perhaps you're just way too remote. You're just too far away from people.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. This poor couple.
Yeah. Let's change the holiday plans immediately.
Yes. It's interesting who you meet on tours. There was one where actually where were we? We were in Nice, which is in the south of France. And this one goes into a different currency altogether. But we were on the second floor of this very old building, that has the balcony, the kind of like facade that you normally see in Paris, with the windows that open out into a cobbled street. And this couple with a small child, they were sleeping, and then they heard music. And it was very, very beautiful music. And the child herself was very musical, was very drawn to the voice. And the husband, it's a young couple. The husband says, my goodness, whoever is playing that, we have to see who it is, because I want my daughter to learn about the opera and all these different things, arts and classical music and things of that nature. And they meet with the landlady, and I'll stop right there.
Yeah. I don't think that's a performance you want to repeat of.
No.
No. There's some remarkable stories and snippets in this second section as well, Anna, so I recommend Portal to anybody who's yet to read it. I've read it several times, and it's a fascinating read, and the more I read it, the more I discover, so I recommend it highly.
Thank you.
You touched on your upcoming book, so before I let you leave, could you give us a bit of a synopsis in regards to what this book's going to be about, and what this lady's remarkable story seems to refer to?
Well, this book is markedly different from the first book in that I actually wrote an entire biography. And when I say biography, the entire book from beginning to end focuses on this young girl's encounter. Now, the girl today is 93 years old. At the time when this happened, it was at the height of World War II, and it's set in Germany. And it focuses on her attempting to reunite with her father. And in doing so, when escaping detection, because she was a very highly regarded Nazi Youth Corps mentor, she had to escape, and she didn't do it by train or by bus, so to speak. She had to go through forest. She had to go through German forests where there were numerous prisoners, citizens, civilians, Jewish people who were murdered by the Nazis in those forests, either in, part of the death camp thing that they did where they put them in trenches and never even buried. They just covered the bodies, mass graves.
Yeah.
So this is where she was forced to walk through for 3 straight weeks, subsisting on a small basket of food, and basically the clothing on her back. She was carrying a rucksack, and eventually she ate berries, twigs, undergrowth, and she told me she found the clover very, very edible. So we're talking about a 14-year-old at the time when this happened. And the things that she encountered in the woods are very unusual. They are not living, just to give you a hint. Some aided her, which is the more positive parts of the book, but some did not. So to this hair-raising experience, she meets up finally with her father, and I won't say what happened at that point. I don't want to give away the ending, but the nature of the book focuses on a series of German forests. Some are still here today. I was just looking at Google Maps about, well, a month ago. As I was getting to the riveting parts of the book, I had to remember exactly how she trekked. And I mentioned to you before the show, I was actually going to take a trip to look at the villages that are now there. But at the time of World War II Germany, ending in April of 45, these forests were still there. And whatever happened in them, I believe some of them are still happening today. And it's all about what happens when you see violence on a mass scale, things that happen that interrupt people from being able to live. So that is the focus of the next book.
Ah, fantastic. I look forward to that, and it sounds a thoroughly hair-raising encounter that we're going to be reading about. So I wish you the best of luck with that, Anna.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me today. It's been lovely to catch up with you again. I know we were laughing about it being 2 years, but we do keep in touch apart from that as well. So where can everybody get a hold of Portal and keep an eye out for the new book when it's released? Okay, well,
Portal, as you know, is published by Behind the Fray Publishing. It was published by Flying Disc Press before that. It is, again, available on Amazon. It's available on Kindle and paperback as well. The other book will be released at some point in the winter before the end of the year. I can't vouch for the exact date, but at this point, I'm halfway through the writing and the editing is done on the first half. So I'm pretty confident that it probably will be released, before the Christmas break. So I can be reached if anybody wants to contribute stories. I'm very open to that as well, and wanted to tell everyone who's listening, if their story does make it to my third book, I know this is well in advance, they can receive a complimentary signed copy of the book. I am on Facebook. I'm also on Twitter. And recently I resurrected my account on Instagram, and it's all under Anna Marie Manalo. So that's probably the most visible way to get me and contribute a story.
Fantastic. Well, I'll put links to everything and a link to Beyond the Fray and Amazon for your book as well. Anna,
Thank
as
you
always,
so much.
My pleasure, and it's been lovely to catch up with you again. Thank you for your time, and thank you for sharing some of your stories with us.
Thank you as well.
You are very welcome, and hopefully we will speak again soon.
Okay.